Concerning the Church, ascesis and worship. The particular characteristic of orthodoxy is ascesis and the communion of worship. Early to church. Go to church early. We do orthos for the faithful and not for the chairs and stasides. Attending church by proxy. Once a lady told him, Father Epiphaninos, I don't go to church when my husband goes. Oh, so then you shouldn't eat when he eats and you shouldn't sleep when he sleeps? Are these things proper? Each one goes to church for himself, not for the other person. Concerning Holy Communion. Divine Communion is par excellence, sacrament of faith. In Holy Baptism we have water, sanctified water, but water nevertheless. In unction we have oil, sanctified of course, but oil. In Divine Communion we see bread, we taste bread, but it is not bread. It is flesh. We see wine, we taste wine, but it is not wine. It is blood. It is par excellence the sacrament of faith because our senses are challenged. Divine Communion is medicine, not a reward. Injustices in the Church. Why, in the area of the Church, are improprieties and injustices committed? And why can we not find perfection, even in the people who are most dedicated to God? So that we do not base ourselves on persons and things which are related to the earth, and so we can turn our thought constantly to God and toward heaven, which is our permanent homeland. Who has need of the other? To the comment of a spiritual child of his that it is pleasing to have smart people in the church because it needs them, he responded, Of course it is pleasing to have smart and talented people in the church. However, not because it needs them. The church needs no one. We have need of her, because without her we are not saved. Of course, no matter which abilities we have, we must use them for the glory of Christ. However, we must not overly stress our contribution. We are worthless servants. Luke 17:10. The church saves, she is not saved. The peace of the evangelicals. Once he was asked, Elder, it is known that peace reigns only in the soul of people of God. However, the evangelicals also maintain that they feel a permanent calmness in their hearts. How is it possible for this to occur, since they are in delusion? And he responded, In the villages, my child, when the villagers wish to tie their donkey for grazing, it is not necessary to tie it by all 4 feet. It suffices to tie it by 1. The devil does the same thing with the evangelicals. Since he has tied them by the foot of heresy, he does not attack them with other temptations. Thus it is explained why they feel peace as they maintain. However, this peace is a superficial and temporal. Truly, it is food and drink. The Protestants maintain that in the sacrament of divine Eucharist, we don't have the actual body and blood of our Lord, but that it is a simple remembrance of the sacrifice of his crucifixion. The elder responded to this, As we know, the body of the Lord upon the cross not only was not broken up into small pieces, but not even a bone of his was broken. So how then does the Lord during the imparting of the sacrament of the divine Eucharist say, Take, eat, this is my body, which is broken, 1 Corinthians 11:24. If it were merely a simple remembrance, he would not have said, which is broken up into small pieces, because such a thing had not occurred in the crucifixion for them to remember it. Ordination of women. Once, some spiritual children of his were worried upon hearing that in Great Britain women priests were being ordained by the Anglicans, and they asked him what possibility could happen if similar ideas ever came into the Orthodox Church. The elder, with his familiar sense of humor which distinguished him many times, responded, Why do you worry, my children? On the one hand, we have as a sign pious women who want to carry monasticism on their shoulders, faithfully keeping the traditions of Holy Orthodoxy. And on the other hand, the feminists of the Greek land hear church and run in panic. So don't worry, Orthodoxy is not in danger of ordaining any women, neither impious nor much less a pious one. Monasticism. Monasticism and theosis. Monasticism is the quickest road to theosis. Concerning the great habit. The great habit is not a reward, but a period of struggling. The great habit, either for the love of God or for lifelong repentance. Preparing someone for tantering. The things which you do now by right, prayer, fasting, obedience, you will do out of duty when you receive the great habit. Focus your attention on the subject of obedience and lack of backtalk and argumentativeness. Humility is more important than fasting and prayer. The rule may be changed by the elder, however, he can never tell you, be proud, or talk back, or disobey. You will have your opinion about something, but if they tell you to do this, you will respond, may it be blessed, and you will do it, even if it is crooked or backwards. Behavior of monks. Personally, I yield to you all. On matters of the holy monastery, however, I don't yield to anyone. Teaching to monks. We have not come here mainly for handicraft, nor for gardens and construction, because even without these we can save our soul. We came here mainly for the soul, and to save it we must pass our day sinlessly, with meekness, the canona, and prayer. If you argue before third persons, know that you will leave the holy monastery. I did not build the monastery so that souls may be scandalized. Carefreeness and poverty. Even though the elder had not served as an obedient, editors note we coined this word for lack of an exact English translation. Within the narrow meaning of the term, he had a monastic conscience such as one rarely finds in clerics working in society. This conscience he tried to inspire in his spiritual children and his celibate clerics. Behold an example related to the monastic virtue of poverty. One of his spiritual children, a celibate priest appointed as a priest-preacher, considered it only natural to have some small savings from his salary deposited in the post office treasury for times of need. One day in a telephone communication with the elder, the priest mentioned in the flow of the conversation the existence of the deposits without being conscious of the sinfulness of the thing. As soon as the elder heard about the bank book, he shouted at him and obligated him to go immediately the next day, then it was night, and invalidate the booklet and withdraw the deposits. So foreign to his conscience was an anxious concern about the future. Attachment. One can even be attached to his glasses. The monastic calling and decision. In answer to the thoughts of a certain youth who pressured himself with the fear that he might become psychologically ill if after quite a bit of a trial in a holy monastery he attempted the monastic life and subsequently found that he was not suited for it. Don't be afraid. A man who decides to become a monk after the absolutely necessary trial in a monastery is suited 100% for the monastic life. But even if that which you are afraid of happens, you will be considered a martyr in Christ and will have a reward for this. A certain youth was moved by frequent visitations to monasteries. He himself, however, was particularly loving of worldly experiences, music, theater, trips, and entertainments. And he once asked Father Epiphaninos if it is allowed for him to think of the consequences of his becoming a monk. The elder responded, "My child, you're not suited for a monk. You are so extroverted. The monk ought to have the opposite direction, inward, not out of himself." As much as possible before giving his blessing, the elder sought maturity in those spiritual children of his who were considered the monastic dedication, and certainly only after they demonstrated persistent prayer and patience. Such a decision must not be the result of youthful enthusiasm. This had caused him to become the object of unfavorable criticism from certain monks. One student, a spiritual child of the elder, had visited the holy mountain, and in the course of a conversation with a certain monk, mentioned who his spiritual father was. The monk, despite the fact that he extolled the gifts of the elder, also made the following comment: "Just think, he does not give the blessing for young people to come to become monks." When he returned to Athens, the student saw the elder and mentioned this to him. And Father Epiphaninos then told him, "If anyone else tells you the same things, tell him the following. My elder, who confesses many people, asks you, if some family leader comes to you and reveals to you that in his youth, from youthful enthusiasm, he had been tonsured a monk, but could not take it, abandoned it, and returned to the world and started a family, what will you advise him? To abandon his family and go mourn far from them in his monastery for the breaking of the promise which he had given to God? Because that is what he must do. What will happen, though, with his family? Why are they to blame? I have chanced upon many such cases, my child, and for this reason I do not easily give young men the blessing to become monks. I allow their monastic calling to mature a bit, for them to examine themselves and to ascertain that they can bear it and persist in their decision. Then I give them a blessing with joy and with both my hands. This, however, does not mean that the elder favored aged bachelorhood. On the contrary, if his spiritual children had decided on marriage, but delayed without reason to proceed to it, or if they had not decided anything, and the years were passing by, then half jokingly and half seriously, the elder exerted his pressure. What will happen with you? Don't reach your 50th year, and then seek marriage. Some of you, when you are young, ask me for monasteries, and when you get old, you ask me for brides and families. Once, the Eurondissa called him on the phone to seek his advice on the following topic. A certain pious girl who desired to become a nun at her monastery had a problem with her spiritual father. He possessed an anti-monastic spirit and would not give her a blessing to realize her holy longing. Elder, what should I do? Should I advise her to obey her spiritual father and choke her longing for monastic life? Or should I urge her to ignore his opinion and come to the monastery without a blessing? Listen, Eurondissa, her desire is in everything holy and venerable. However, if she comes to the monastery without a blessing and for one or another reason meets difficulty in her new life, she will blame her disobedience. If again she makes progress in the monastic life, she will have inside her the thorn that what she is doing is being done without a blessing. For this reason, I advise you to urge her to be obedient and pray that if God wishes her longing to be fulfilled, to change the position of her spiritual father. And this is what happened. After about 6 months, and rejoicing to the elder, the Eurondissa announced that the aforesaid girl had secured the much longed-for blessing from her spiritual father, who, yielding in agreement, told her, "My child, since after such a long time of my own denial you continue to long for the monastic life, it means that your desire is from God. So go, with my prayer and my blessing." And Father Epiphaninos, Eurondissa, God rewarded her obedience. Monastics and lay people. Elder, does that which St. John of the Ladder says, that monastics are light for the lay people, mean that the most virtuous lay person is lacking in comparison to the worst monastic? No, here the saint is not speaking of any monk whatsoever, but of the monastic lifestyle, that is, of monasticism. So he means that monasticism as an institution is higher than worldly life. Of course, this does not mean that there are not lay people whom monastics cannot even begin to approach. The will of God, a certain spiritual child of his mentions. In the final deliberation in which the founding of the Hesychasterion was decided, I told the elder, "Don't you think that we resemble Don Quixote?" And to the understandable wonder of the elder, I continued, "How will we build a monastery without money? You are penniless, and we are penniless, as you taught us." Then the elder stressed with emphasis, "We shall ascertain the will of God precisely in this. If he wants us to build a monastery, he will send us money. If he does not send us money, that will reveal that it is not blessed for us to found it. Thus we will not enter into the toil of starting out." The construction of the Hesychasterion was subsequently begun, because God, in a wondrous manner, rewarding the elder's faith, richly blessed his decision for the founding of a sacred monastery. The treasury of the monastery. A spiritual child of his relates, One day the elder said, "Know that the treasury of the monastery does not empty. The more we give alms, so much does God give to the treasury." During one phase of the building of the Hesychasterion, I was sent by the elder, together with 2 contractors, to buy construction materials. Upon departing, I asked for money from the elder for the purchase, in which case he ascertained that there was none. Then he asked for a loan from a spiritual child of his who was present. It was decided that we should pass by his house to get it. We both went down in the car. Because the other contractor was delaying, I went back up to find him. When the elder saw me, he told me, "Do you remember that I had told you that the treasury of the Hesychasterion does not empty?" "Yes," I answered, "but look how it emptied." "No," says the elder, "it did not empty." "Then give me money," I retorted. The elder's answer amazed me. "As soon as you descended, such and such a brother called and said that he has 50,000 drachmas in his office for the Hesychasterion. So pass by his office to get the money. The Panagia has once again filled our treasury." Advertisement. On April 15th, 1977, the small brotherhood of the Hesychasterion settled in. Precisely the next day, the first gathering of the fathers took place. "Be very careful," said the elder. "You will not advertise the monastery. You will not say that we have a good elder or abbot or good brothers. You will never tell a man, 'Come here to be a monastic.' Don't go to that or to that monastery. You will not criticize another monastery to lift up our own. All these things are outside of my character. If God wants to send us people, he will send them, and without advertisements. If you disobey the above command, you will mention this to me in confession as a sin." Concerning rights. During the duration of the construction in the monastery, it happened that sometimes the workers sought more money than what was agreed upon. The monk responsible for such matters would not accept these demands of theirs, and thus the matter reached the elder, who directed him to pay them based on the new demands. "But elder," the monk at once retorted, "we're being treated unjustly." "My child," the elder then responded, "have you not yet understood that we Christians ought to forbear injustices also?" Plumbing. At a certain period, the monastery attempted to secure water from unused springs of the village. Documents, telephone communications, as well as personal meetings with various persons had occurred. Once 2 clerics were called to be present at the community council, which would discuss the matter of providing water from the aforesaid springs to the monastery. "Truly, we descended as representatives of the monastery," recalls the one, "and after so many consultations we had believed that they would give us the water. Despite this, they refused. We were very upset. With a heavy heart we ascended to the monastery. The elder awaited us at the wide stairs. 'So, what happened?' Frustrated. 'Unfortunately, yet under nothing.' 'Glory to God, now I have settled down.' We imagined that he understood wrongly. 'Yet under what glory to God? Unfortunately, they will not give us the water.' 'Yes, my child, I understood it. Since we submitted so many documents, attended so many meetings, and asked so many to speak for us, and you also went down to speak, and despite all this, nothing happened, it means that it was not God's will for us to get the water. God showed us that he is preparing something better for us. So tomorrow, right away, find the tools for us to begin drilling wells." Concerning vestments. Some clergy, some spiritual children of his, were pressuring for somewhat luxurious vestments to enter the monastery. The elder insisted that the best ones are the sewn ones of Calamon, and that he would not allow luxurious vestments to enter the monastery. "But elder, these which we call luxurious are cheaper than those of Calamon," they responded. "Yes, my child, but the luxurious ones offend, whereas the same thing does not happen with the more expensive ones. I am not at all concerned about the price. I am also concerned if the vestment which we wear offends. The believer at the time of worship should not be impressed or examine the vestments of the priest, but should worship God in spirit and in truth. He should forget the earth, and his mind should ascend to heaven. But many maintain that the luxurious vestments comprise tradition." At that moment he exploded. I believe that the only thing which does not entail tradition is showy vestments, and I very much long for the time to come when as many priests as have these viewpoints realize that they must simplify their vestments, so that we could become as we were in more ancient, better ages in the first years of Christianity, when the Christians admired and boasted of other things, not of vestments of priests. What a well-known Hagirite said when he saw the simple vestments at the Hesychasterion is certainly characteristic. I thought I was in the apostolic age. Life in Christ, concerning obedience, trust, and salvation. Let us not have trust in ourselves if we wish to be saved. Obedience and logic. In obedience, do not let logic work, but the heart. Do not think, the elder said this, but he meant that, or he did not say it correctly. Then the wicked one will begin to fool you. Obedience has value when it is done in something which seems irrational to us. Doing only those things which seem logical does not have this value. This is not called obedience, but agreement. And in this case, it is irrational for someone not to obey. Christian versus communist obedience. Elder, what is the difference between the obedience of a communist to his party and a Christian to his spiritual father? The second obedience frees us from our passions. Let God guide you. Counsels to a certain self-confident youth who made plans of offering his services to the church and wished to see if it was God's will to realize them. My child, do not have much trust in your logic. Let God guide your steps. When man desires to do God's will, God finds the manner in which to reveal it to him. God does not need us. He cares for his church and may raise up men to guide his people from the stones. Obedience and contrition. A certain novice monk, due to his obedience to the elder, had obtained much contrition in prayer. Even when he was walking on the road, he was continually saying the prayer. It happened once, however, through the influence of the devil, that he showed the elder such disobedience that he went to the holy mountain to seek the advice of another Yerondo there to see if he was right or not in holding a certain position. Of course, his contrition had disappeared. The elder of the holy mountain, as was natural, pointed out his mistake and urged him to return and seek forgiveness from Father Epiphaninos. The candidate realized his mistake and decided to return in repentance. So he was saying on the way, while walking through a forest, I will go and make a prostration to the elder and ask his forgiveness that I distressed him with my disobedience. And the Lord, before he even fulfilled this decision of his, visited him in the forest, granting him again the lost contrition. Obedience after death. Once it was necessary, mentions a spiritual child of his, for me to sign the responsibility statement required by Law 105. I was having difficulty, though, mentioning the full truth, because thus a certain important job for me would be lost for nothing. So I mentioned to the elder that I was planning to write a certain hidden lie. The elder retorted that I should in no way write lies, first for reasons of Christian ethics, and second for reasons of legal consequences. I wavered a lot. The last minute, however, I decided to conform to the direction of the elder. And oh, by a miracle, at the last minute a solution appeared, and thus neither did I sign lies, and I also gained the job. I found myself in a similar predicament after the elder's death. However, doing obedience after death, the matter was solved without me expecting it. Concerning confession, on secrets. If you wish to make progress in the spiritual life, do not keep secrets from your elder. Behold, now is the day of salvation. To all who put off their confession for later with the justification that they are having difficulty, he would say, since today you're having difficulty confessing, how will you be led to it in the future, when you will have become even more solidified in sin. On the same topic, why do you grant the blossom of your youth to sin and only old age to the Lord? What would you say if you were to see a very old man seeking to be taken up as a king's servant? If, says the sacred Augustine, you repent in your old age, then you do not leave sin, but it leaves you. We have greater responsibility. Correctly, St. Nicodemus of the Holy Mountain speaks strictly in his book on confession, because we who are within spiritual life have more responsibility. Of course, one "I have sinned" saves a man, just like the thief and Taisia. They, however, were outside of the church for a long time. Those who are inside it have more obligations. It is a sacrament. Once he had confided to his spiritual children, "Many times in confession the following happens to me. So long as you present the problems to me which are related with sins, I prepare in my thoughts some response. When, however, I begin to speak, I say other things. Proof that a sacrament is occurring." Preparation. What should we ask for, Elder, in our prayer before confession? Ask for recollection of sins, boldness to confess them, and repentance. She confessed for her daughter-in-law. A certain woman went to confess and began criticizing her daughter-in-law. The elder stopped her and, with a strict mood, told her, "Leave off your daughter-in-law. Tell me your own sins." She, as if she had not heard, continued unrestrainingly criticizing. Finally, she finished. Then the Yeronder got up and told her, "Hey, tell your daughter-in-law to come here so that I can read the prayer of absolution over her." In which case she asked with wonder, "And me? I will read it for you when you confess your own sins." God awaits us. The elder related that once an aged grandfather who was confessing for the first time came to the confessional. Among other things, he mentioned that he had choked a newly born child of his because he did not want it. "Father, will God forgive me for this beastliness of mine?" he asked anxiously. "Grandfather, there is not a sin confessed with contrition which will not be forgiven. When did this event take place?" "Many years ago." "So think how man-loving God is, who awaited you so many years for this moment." Real repentance. "Did you see that man who just now came out of the confessional?" the elder once asked a youth. "Yes," he replied. "His whole conduct impressed me as well." The elder continued, "Every time he confesses, he ties me to the chair, because each confession of his is also a trickling of tears, and he has a high government position. Do I have such humility?" Selecting a spiritual father. A theologian whom the elder knew once told him that he was having difficulty finding a suitable elder. Then Father Epiphaninos answered, "My beloved one, you don't have a problem with an elder. You have a problem with yourself. If you had a problem with an elder, you would go out on the street, turn right, walk 100 meters, turn left. You would walk another 50 meters, stop and wait there till the first spiritual father walked by. You would do undiscerning obedience, and you would have neither a problem with an elder nor a problem with salvation. It is not of holy elders which we have need, as much as of holy obedience. This is what we lack. For did all the great saints of the church have a certain holy elder? No. What they did have was holy humility and holy obedience. For this reason also they became holy." Yerunda, if despite his attempts someone fails in the selection of a spiritual father, what happens with the matter of obedience? Do you think, my child, that God will leave him unaided? Seeing his good disposition, he will enlighten his spiritual father what to advise him. Although even if he advises him wrongly, God will admire the obedience he does and will find a manner so that the mistaken counsel will end up for his good. Yerunda, what happens in the case in which our spiritual father asks us to do something which clashes with the Holy Scripture or the sacred canons? God will not allow anything evil or harmful like this to happen, so long as we are obedient. I remind you of 2 incidents from the life of the ascetics which certify that which I tell you. The first, a certain father took his small son and went to become a monk. The elder, of course, after an inner notification to try his obedience, told him to throw his child into the lit stove. When the father, doing undiscerning obedience, threw his child in the stove, it went out miraculously. The second, in a similar circumstance, the elder gave a commandment to a certain father to throw his child to the crocodiles of the river. Simultaneously, though, he sent another monk to prevent him in case he would show his obedience with this deed. So God strove in this case also, so that the complete obedience of the future monk would be revealed, and that the murder would not take place. Consequently, when there exists obedience, even if this includes things contrary to God's law, and is the murder in the above circumstances, no evil is manifested. On the contrary, disobedience, even when it refers to such circumstances, is that which is punished. Behold an example from the Old Testament. A certain prophet by the Lord's command told a man to hit him. He, however, did not do it. Then the prophet told him, "Because you did not obey the command of the Lord, behold, as soon as you are departed from me, a lion shall slay you." 3 Kings 20:36. And truly, this is what happened. A certain lady who confessed for the first time to the Yeronder told him in the end, "I, my father, would prefer to confess to a certain spiritual father who is elderly and blind." And the elder readily said, "If he were also deaf, it would even be better." Concerning prayer, not as I will. At the end of every petition, we should say, "Not as I will, but as you will," Matthew 26:39. There's only one petition where we do not need to add this. In that petition for our salvation, because God wishes all people to be saved and to come to the knowledge of the truth. 1 Timothy 2:4. Attention and prayer. When you say the prayer, turn your nous's attention to each word. Work and prayer. When you work, it is both allowed and imposed that you pray, but when you pray, you should not work. Proof that the devil exists. Any person whatsoever can be concentrated, even for hours, thinking of a certain problem or a certain matter without his attention being distracted by anything else. In earlier times also, when adding machines did not exist, accountants worked for 8 hours doing additions without lifting their heads and without their mind wandering, even if a compressor was working next to them. Something analogous occurs with many students when they are occupied by their lessons. If, however, someone sets out to pray, then all the personal, family, or business occupations project themselves before him and distract him. This is proof that the devil exists and that prayer burns him up. For this reason, he fights it. Never neglect prayer. A working couple once asked him, "Elder, when at night we return very tired to our home, we don't have the desire for prayer." How do you have the desire to eat? Just as you don't neglect food, no matter how tired you are, all the more so, and even more so, you should never neglect the food of the soul, communication with God. Don't ever neglect prayer. At the table, in the morning, in the evening, at night, especially don't neglect small compline for any reason, no matter how occupied and tired you are. It is a matter of self-sacrifice and mainly of love. When a certain person, beloved by you, calls you up very late at night, how is it that despite your tiredness you hook yourselves to the receiver, and furthermore sometimes 1 or 2 hours, without being impatient, but on the contrary you rejoice? A petition for prayer. When you would tell him, "Father, matters on such and such a problem have reached an impasse. I am now at the limits of my endurance," he would answer, "Prayer, my child, much prayer. God can either lift your cross or give you strength to carry it into the end. And don't forget, the impasse of men is par excellence the field of God's action. It is the opportunity of God. Do you consider it easy for me to pray in the state in which I am now? A spiritual child once retorted. He received the answer, pray also to be able to pray. Persistence in prayer. How will we become better, elder? We remain constantly in the same things. My child, practice much prayer, and then you will see the improvement. How should we do it? There's no magic wand for us to tap and have Christian progress come automatically. Not all downwards. The elder urged a certain spiritual child of his who worked until late at night and would not go to vigils. My child, look a little upward, not all downward, all on the earthly things. Look at your soul a bit, too. Father, he persisted, I don't have time. I don't have the opportunity. Once that youth became ill, and the elder visited him in the hospital. As soon as he saw the youth lying in bed, he put the index finger on his hand, on his temple, telling him, do you remember what I was telling you? And you were right, Yaronda. Now you look upward against your will, continued Father Epiphaninos. When you become well, you will look up of your own will. Concerning charity. Safe deposits. Your money, my children, place in the bank of heaven. Let us exceed the Pharisees. We must give charity to receive charity, to give above our tithe, that is 10% of our income, for those who suffer, so that our righteousness, our virtue, can exceed that of the scribes and the Pharisees, who gave 1/10, and so that we can enter the kingdom of the heavens. Matthew 5:20. The expenses are many times greater. Give 1/10 of your income to the poor, the elder often repeated to a certain wealthy person. The man would sometimes justify himself, at other times gave some crumbs. Once he disappeared for quite a while. One afternoon the elder saw him again. Where were you? I lost you for so long. Don't ask, I'm ashamed to tell you. Speak freely. Here, every so often you were telling me about the tithe. And I also said, all right, aren't there other spiritual fathers? Truly. So I decided to change spiritual fathers. All that time went by. My wife got sick. The doctors scared us. We went abroad and squandered many times more than I would have given for the tithe. Now I realize this. God taught me in action. So be careful, said the elder. Henceforth, keep this command of God at the appropriate moment. On the eve of Christmas of 1968, he ascertained while he was in confessional that only 50 drachmas had remained for the poor. Then he interrupted the confession for a little and prayed, Lord, if other people come as well who need money, how will I allow them to leave with empty hands? Please send me money. After this prayer, he continued the confession. After a little while, a child knocked on the door and handed an envelope to the elder, saying, A certain man who was in a hurry gave me this envelope for you, Father Epiphaninos. The elder opened the envelope and found 20,000 drachmas inside and a note with the words, For your poor. When I met the elder after Christmas, he told me about this incident and how he was able to distribute all the money. He concluded, Now I am again without money. However, God will provide. That night, returning from the 3 hierarchs, he was in tears. I asked him for the reason he was moved, and he answered, My child, are we worthy to live such miracles? The same man, in the same manner, sent me today 15,000 drachmas. You steal from the poor. A certain man gave alms every month. Once, however, he did not give, and he told the elder, Father, I did not give charity this month because the plumbing in my house broke, and I spent all the money there. With this deed of yours, it's as if you stole from the poor, answered the elder. You should not spend the tithe for our own personal needs. The tithe belongs to God for the poor. The floor became wormy. Once, conversing with a spiritual child of his, he urged him not to neglect to give his tithe to the poor. The man retorted that he was building a new house. He had many expenses. He calculated even the smallest expenditure. And although the elder stressed to him that God would provide for him from elsewhere, he was not persuaded. After quite a while, he visited the elder and announced with affliction that all the wood of his parquet floor had become wormy in a very short period of time. And the elder replied charmingly, "That's what whoever does not give charity suffers. You give 1/10 and God saves you from 100-fold expense. You don't leave them, they leave you." Once, a well-off elderly man came to seek advice on how to dispose of his estate and composing his will. He was childless. The elder advised him to begin disposing of his estate, which was large, while he was still alive. He reacted with the justification that he needed his property for his old age and for his wife. "If my wife becomes ill, father," he told him, "what will happen?" "God will see your loving heart and will not give illness," responded the elder. Despite this, the man did not obey. After the death of his wife, the elder urged him anew to give alms. "Father," he would say, "I will leave money to philanthropic institutions in my will." "Then you won't leave them, they will leave you," the elder told him. "But how, my father, since I will write them into my will?" "No, my beloved one, if you give them now, then truly you are leaving them. If, though, you dispose of them after death, then they leave you. And so that you can understand what I mean, I tell you the following. I allow you to take them with you. Are you able? Of course not. So do you see? Consequently, they leave you. You do not leave them." And his conversant was convinced. Concerning fasting. The institution of fasting is necessary. I fear much that those who consciously ignore the practice of fasting without having health reasons are not really interested in the salvation of their souls. Lawgivers. Once, the elder related, a certain spiritual child of mine came and was telling me, "You know, Father, I don't accept fasting. What does fasting mean anyway?" I answered him, "Fasting is an institution of the church. It was given as a law in paradise. The prophets fasted, as did Moses, the Lord himself, the apostles, the holy fathers. If you continue not to fast and hold on to this viewpoint, then change elders." That's what I told him. If, however, he told me, "You know, Father, I accept fasting as the church ordains, but I cannot fast so much. I am trying, however, to achieve something," I would tell him, "I accept you, my little child. Try as much as you can to live up to what our church says. But to tell me, I don't accept fasting. Who are you? What are these things you are saying? Do you hear them?" He responded similarly to someone who mentioned to him in confession that he placed the fasts among the smaller obligations and for this reason did not keep them, but strove to be correct in the basic elements of our faith. "Won't you tell me, did you come here as a repentant sinner to receive remission, or as a lawgiver? If the first is the case, you cannot place fasting in the secondary elements of the Christian life. If the second is the case, then you are not a disciple of Christ, and I cannot read the prayer of absolution over you." A serious sin. A couple who were spiritual children of his recalls. During the 15 days of August, the Theotokos fast of 1967, we received hospitality at a certain relative's home, and we did not fast, following the practice in this home. We considered it very natural and forgave ourselves. After a short time, we went for confession to the elder, but did not mention anything about this. We confessed the other things. He read the prayer of forgiveness, and afterwards we struck up a conversation about various interesting topics. In the flow of the conversation, we mentioned that we had not fasted. We would have preferred that the earth had opened up to swallow us from our shame when he told us strictly, "Do you think that you have confessed now when you kept such a serious sin silent?" A test for fasting. When you would tell him that you were sick and that the doctor advised you not to fast, he would lighten the fasting even unto the full breaking of the fast, without approaching the subject scholastically. At this point it seemed that some people had reproached him for what they believed was his easy implementation of economia, Specifically, one person told him, the spiritual father should give permission for someone to break the fast only for health reasons, according to the Holy Fathers. When his state is such that he is truly bedridden and his house has caught fire from the four corners, so that he does not have the strength to get up and leave. He must be that ill. Then the elder answered him, the Holy Fathers don't say such things. They do say, the person insisted. They don't. Because the Fathers don't write stupidities. I confess bedridden people who have suffered strokes, heart attacks, and they're handicapped from various inherited neurological illnesses, who not only can fast, but it is medically imposed on them to fast due to their illness. On the contrary, I have spiritual children who may seem healthy because they are active, they work, yet they are excused from observing the fast due to invisible sufferings of theirs. For example, sugar diabetes. So the criterion of the breaking or observance of the fast is not whether someone is bedridden or if he can walk, but the type of suffering and the opinion of pious doctors who will also be consulted. And he added, fasting has its purpose the bridling of the unruly urges and appetites of the body into humble man. If the illness has by divine allowance undertaken this task, then what should you do with the fasting? He related furthermore, with a smile, that he had mentioned to Father Paisios, the well-known ascetic of the Holy Mountain, the rule about one's house having to be on fire, and the Holy Elder, with a loving and playful disposition, told him, yes, of course, thus you should do. You should carry with you a plastic jug of gasoline, and when someone asks you not to fast for health reasons, you tell him, hey, just wait a minute. Pour gasoline on the four corners of his room and start a fire. If you see that he can't move and he is in danger of being burned, allow him to break the fast. If, however, you see him jump and flee to escape, tell him, no, you must fast. Revision of the fasting rules. The elder was completely opposed to the long-standing, persistent attempts by certain secularized ecclesiastical circles to revise and loosen the fasting rules of the Church. He used to say, the value of fasting is so great that even if it had not been instituted by the Church, she would have to institute it now. How much less then should we seek to abolish or alter an institution already established centuries ago, which has manifested so many saints? Fasting and passions. In opposition to whatever action the Church has imposed, these circles even use patristic viewpoints, which, according to them, put down the importance of fasting for the spiritual prospering of the faithful. Thus, for example, they mention the patristic viewpoint that fasting is useless when it is accompanied by Pharisaic haughtiness, by condemnation, by slander, hating of people, or revenge, or even by gluttony and lack of moderation in food, even if it is fast-worthy foods. According to the elder, these positions of the Fathers do not at all lessen the value of fasting. On the contrary, they show it forth, since they counterpose it to such great evils as the above ones, which are enlisted by the devil to render it useless. Nowhere do the Fathers say to those who seek to be delivered of these evils that they should not fast, since fasting is so useless. On the contrary, not keeping the fast assists in the solidification of the passions. Fasting and diets. The elder had often to respond to challenges related to fasting. Once they asked him, who fasts better, Father, in a fasting period? He who eats 2 plates of bean soup without oil, halva, and so forth, or he who eats 1 hard-boiled egg? Without hesitation, the elder answered, the first. The second is simply just doing a diet, and he justified it. Fasting has 2 aims: the exercise of restraint in the body through the limitation of foods which are rich in nourishing substances, and the alignment to the commands of the Church, which entails an ascesis for the soul. He who eats 1 egg in a fasting period without there being health reasons, of course, violates the command of the Church, like those who, while attempting to have a varied diet for reasons of good nourishment, eat on Tuesday and Thursdays beans and vegetables, whereas on Wednesdays and Fridays they eat non-fast-worthy foods. This type of scorning of the church is insulting, given the fact that the observance of what she has established is not costly and it's easy. They should eat the non-fast-worthy foods on Tuesday and Thursday and the fast-worthy foods on Wednesday and Friday. Thus, without trampling on fasting, the same result from the viewpoint of nourishment will be achieved. It is obvious that there exists at the least great ignorance and indifference for whatever the Church has instituted, if not a worse thing, Luciferian haughtiness. It is implied that the elder did not favor eating a lot of fast-worthy foods, or the luxurious and far-fetched delicacies during fasting periods, even if they're considered fast-worthy foods. He always advised plainness, independent of whether there was a fast or not, both to monks and to lay people. Furthermore, he would put forth as worthy of censuring the torturous self-limitation of food, which worldly people often submit themselves to in order to maintain their figures. And all this, of course, not for health reasons, but for vanity and for show. Fasting and name days. The topic had often been put forth whether non-fasting food is allowed to be offered in cases of named day celebrations, special events, meetings of friends, and so forth during fasting periods. The elder used to say that taking care of people is a great virtue, the exercise of which cannot be halted during the fasting periods. At the table, though, fast-worthy food absolutely must be offered. Within certain limits, they may be more specially prepared or more tasty if we wish to honor certain people. However, they absolutely must be fast-worthy. Fasting and hospitality. The opinion prevails among many that one may break the fast for reasons of hospitality. From the history of the Church, the behavior of certain desert fathers is put forth as an example. They would stop their fasting in order to offer hospitality to someone, or in order to receive hospitality from a certain brother when they were traveling. The elder clarified matters. Nowhere in the sayings of the desert fathers, he would say, is a certain ascetic praised and projected as an example because he broke the fast for reasons of hospitality. That which is mentioned is that those holy hermits and ascetics broke their own personal ascetic fasting, which was much stricter than what the Church ordained. They ate, for example, a few unboiled soaked beans or raw greens or a little soaked biscuit, and this not every day, but every 2 or 3 days or even more sparsely. So if they happened to offer hospitality to someone, then they would boil the beans or the greens, or if it were a day when wine or oil could be eaten, they would throw in a little oil or also drink a little wine. They may even added a little extra toil in the preparation of this simple food to thus honor their guest. And with humility they would accept similar hospitality during those few times when they would also go out of their hermitage. As soon as the reasons of hospitality were gone, they would return to their strict fasting, or to even more strict fasting, to regain the lost ground, lest their own self fool them, and they find in hospitality some kind of excuse to slacken their fasting. The elder continued, when a certain hermit traveling by foot would visit other ascetics in the desert, they would treat him to a little wine, either because there was an allowance for wine or because they were implementing economia because of the toil of his walking. He would drink it, thanking them politely, but when he returned to his cell, he would remain so many days without water as glasses of wine he had accepted during his trip. His disciple, who would pity him when they were traveling together, would secretly ask those offering hospitality not to offer him any wine. I had confessed to the elder years ago, recalls a spiritual child of his, that on a certain feast day we had offered hospitality in our home to a certain cousin, and because he was a little worldly in his train of thought, for this reason we had not fasted. The elder was strict. On the one hand, the cousin, on the other hand, the best man, the third, the brother-in-law, afterwards, the friend. If you do it in this way, you will never fast. You will do well to offer hospitality. I advise you this to you, even on fast days. But you will offer fast-worthy foods, well-prepared and tasty if you wish to honor someone, but fast-worthy. Today you will simply tell them, is a fast. For this reason, we have fast-worthy food for you. We do not wish to transgress the commands of the church. Fasting and dinners. Many of the elders' spiritual children faced problems with fasting when they took part in dinners with friends or with business people, old fellow students, meals on the job, traveling, academic seminars, and so forth. It is observed that in the contemporary, de-Christianized Western societies, such dinners are planned as a rule on Wednesdays and especially on Fridays because the next day is Saturday and the work weekends. The elder in this perceived a deceptive diabolical attack. Have the other days also vanished? He would say. Obviously, no one takes into consideration these great fasting periods, nor do they take care to see that fast-worthy foods are offered. Consequently, some salads are the only alternative solutions for those who wish to fast. The elder's line was absolute. If you wish to take part in these dinner gatherings, you have the blessing, but you will fast, eating whatever fast-worthy food you can find. If you aren't filled, eat afterwards at your home or at the restaurant. If you cannot keep the fast, then do not take part in them. Fasting and scandalizing. Some people say, we don't fast when we are in a gathering so as not to upset and not to scandalize certain people by our stance. They will make comments. Didn't Christ himself say that we should not show that we are fasting like the hypocrite Pharisees? The elder would respond to this with the following. When we are fasting, as when we are doing any good deed whatsoever, we must act with a humble train of thought, as wretched servants, obeying the commands of the church. And this is independent of whether people see or don't see us, just as we must not seek the praise of people, thus we should not fear their reproaches or comments when we are doing our duty toward the commandments of God. In this case, it is not proper for us to concern ourselves whether or not someone gets upset or is scandalized. If we're doing our duty, the responsibility of the scandalization weighs upon the scandalized person, who in the last analysis either does not recognize the authority of Christ and of his church in our life, or is trying to justify his own weaknesses. Why do we think of those who will be scandalized when they see us fasting, but yet not even consider those who know our principles and beliefs and see us not fasting? In this last case, the responsibility of the scandalization weighs down upon us completely, because we are the transgressors of the command. Furthermore, if we extend this reasoning to the other commands of the church also, we abolish all the ethical law of God. For example, I want to go to church. Do I not almost always meet people on the road? I think if I enter in and they see me, if they're atheists and anti-Christian, they will be bothered and become enraged. If they're pious believers, they will say, what a good Christian. He goes to church. And their praise will take away from me the benefit of even going to church. So let me not go to church. I will go to church when no one will see me. And thus going to church goes bye-bye. Where were these things ever heard of before? What gospel says such things? Concerning trials, they are blessings. Events which now seem like misfortunes later on prove to be God's blessings. Trial and reward. Let us not reconcile the unreconcilable to avoid the cross and to secure our ease. Let us not seek little pillows on which to rest our guilty conscience, because then God will allow us both to suffer harsh trials and also not to have a reward in heaven. The purpose of afflictions. If afflictions did not exist, we would not seek paradise. Just like operations, we should accept afflictions just as we accept the hardship of a surgical operation in order to secure our health. Pain humbles man, and the more he is humbled, the more he approaches God. The only consoler. In great afflictions, only God can console. For this reason, the best thing is prayer, and not so much words of consolation. In times of affliction, look at the crucified one. God does not make mistakes. A certain spiritual daughter of his recalls, years ago in the city where we dwell, something rare happened to one family. The wife, in the space of only 4 or 5 years, buried her husband and her 3 children, and her one daughter had gotten married a few months prior to her death. As much as I knew that the question which arose in me, why, my God, was blasphemous, nevertheless, at first I cultivated this thought. So I confessed this thought of mine. The elder's response was so simple and simultaneously so wise. Just know one thing, he told me. God does not make mistakes. Facing death. Characteristic is the way the elder faced the announcement of the death by car accident of a beloved person, a spiritual child of his. Glory to thee, O God, he said 3 times, and subsequently asked about details about the accident, and he consoled the mourning person. Behold, furthermore, how the elder announced the sudden death of a father of a spiritual child of his, then a student. My child, your father is first a child of God, and then your own father. So the Lord, to whom he belonged, called him close to himself. The afflictions of the righteous. You wonder, why does God allow righteous and virtuous people to suffer from dreadful illnesses? In order to be cleansed even from the least traces of their passions, and to gain a greater crown in heaven. Furthermore, since he allowed his beloved Son to suffer and to die upon the cross, what can we say for the people who, no matter how holy they are, have filth and spots from sins? Exchanging position. A certain youth who had been trained in a school of reserve officers persistently asked the elder to intercede so he could leave the school and become a simple soldier, because in the school he faced great difficulties. After urging him in vain to be patient, Father finally told him, "My child, why don't you go to the asylum for incurable people? Approach a bedridden person and say to him, 'Friend, let's change positions. You go to the school of officers and I will go to your bed.' Then you would see that if he had such a possibility, he would jump up like a spring and run joyfully to take your position or even a more difficult one. Oh, my child, we have our health and we are full of complaints and grumbling." And the youth, he left, changed and encouraged. Married and celibate life. Premarital relations. With flight. The fathers say all battles are gained by attacking. The only battle which is gained by flight is the battle against the flesh. Flesh cover. To some youth who was telling the elder that he had an intense battle of the flesh, and as he believed it would be solved permanently by marriage, the elder responded, "My child, the problem of the flesh is not solved either in marriage, nor celibacy, nor polygamy. The problem of the flesh is solved only by the cover, that is, the tomb. Marriage simply lightens the problem. It does not solve it. So vigilance is needed throughout all our life. Consequently, you must struggle from now, asking God to strengthen you." Continence pills. To a certain other youth who was telling the elder it was not possible for a certain man to remain pure, he responded, "Won't you tell me? What do you think? We celibate priests, do we go with women, or do we take pills to subdue our sexual instinct?" At the youth's loss to answer, the elder continued, "Listen, my child, the pills we take to face temptations of the flesh are prayer, fasting, vigil, confession, divine communion. These keep both us and the unmarried youths pure. You also follow this prescription, and you will see how achievable continence is. On our own, not even for a second could we remain pure. But with divine grace and the aid of God, everything is achieved." A decision to change. Once, relates a spiritual child of the elders, I took a certain acquaintance of mine to go to confession. When he came out of the confessional, he was visibly frustrated. "I am not coming again," he told me. "Why not?" I asked him. "There," he answered me, "when I told him I go with women, he asked me how old I am. I told him 25, in which case he continued, 'Do you realize how fast these 25 years passed?' 'No,' I answered him. 'Well, Another 25 years, and probably another 25 will pass without you again realizing it, and then you will die. And when you end up before Christ, he will ask you, I came and was crucified for you. What did you do for me? You made your body a temple of the Holy Spirit, the member of a prostitute. My acquaintance told me other things also from his conversation with the elder, and I got upset, not of course because I disagreed with Father Epiphaninos' position, but because I had the thought that the elder might have set the hook with more discretion so that my acquaintance would not leave so frustrated. The next day I went and found Father Epiphaninos and presented the problem to him. Look, my child, he told me, confession is a sacrament of repentance. This means that the man who approaches it considers himself worthy of being killed, and that furthermore he is ready to accept with relief both the strictness and the scolding of his spiritual father. If now someone does not consciously realize what the sacrament is, and he thinks that confession is an opportunity to discuss his questions with his spiritual father, or to say his pain, to be consoled, or that it is something like a meeting with a psychologist, then the thing differs because he did not understand the real purpose and the meaning of the sacrament. In any case, tell him to come again so that we can talk together. Finally, I found that acquaintance of mine, and when I recounted my conversation with the elder and said, let's go some day to see him, I received from him the following answer, which proves the wisdom and the correct stance of the elder on the topic. But what should we go say? The man is right. Since I don't intend to stop going with women, such a conversation has no meaning. Neither foolishness nor self-interest. Father, I don't believe anything. Does me staying continent have any meaning? No, my child, none whatsoever. Without God, everything is allowed. But won't you tell me, do you consider me foolish? Of course not. Self-interested? Everything but. Well, does not the suspicion cross your mind, since, as you say, I am neither foolish nor self-interested? Does the suspicion enter your mind that just maybe these things which I maintain and teach, specifically on the topic of purity, are true? Not my sister. A certain spiritual child of the elder notes, I remember the following conversation with the elder when I was a candidate student. Father, a fellow candidate at the prep class, in our conversations, keeps urging me to find a girlfriend. Of course, he does not change my mind, but he bothers me. What should I tell him to make him stop? Does your friend have a sister? He has, Father. Do to him what a certain bishop of our day did to a friend of his for the same reason. Tell him, all right. Do me a favor, however. You know what a good kid I am. So give me your sister for one night. Tell him this and we'll see what happens. The next day, I directly implemented the elder's plan. My friend started his usual stuff. So, my friend, I told him, why should I search to find a girlfriend? Won't you give me your sister tonight and then we will see? My friend drew back, shocked, and he immediately reacted, no, not my sister. What do you think this is? Why not your sister? I answered, as if the other whom you wish me to find is not the sister or the daughter of someone. With the sister of the other person you want to amuse yourself, but your own you protect. Do you see that you are mistaken? From then on my friend was silent concerning girlfriends. Joyously I mentioned the result to Father Epiphaninos. Yeronda, your plan acted like lightning. And smiling, Yeronda said, well, what did the young lad think? Prayer for deliverance. The elder was asked by a certain youth whose personal erotic story ended up in a bad state and harmful for his soul. Can I at least, elder, pray for this being? And Father Epiphaninos strictly, pray that God may deliver you from her remembrance. Give me her name so that I may pray for her. Let's examine the portfolio. It happened that one of the students who confessed to Father Epiphaninos stopped by the apartment where Father dwelt to arrange a certain matter, whether his own or the elder's. The student who related these events no longer remembers. This youth, although he was religious, as he entered the elder's apartment, was holding a portfolio in which he had a certain lewd magazine which he had bought a few hours before at a faraway newsstand, yielding to an intense related temptation. After he entered, he greeted the elder and sat waiting for Father Epiphaninos to find time to deal with the object of his visitation. Suddenly, and smiling, the elder began the conversation with him as follows. "Oh, just this once. Let's examine your portfolio to see its contents." It was easily understood that the youth would have preferred at that moment for the earth to open and to swallow him. Deliverance at a critical moment. A spiritual child of the elder had an intense battle of the flesh and was in danger of sinning with a certain person. A friend of his informed the elder about the danger in which the aforesaid youth was in, and the consequence that he might give in to the will of the flesh. The elder, during his evening prayer, remembered that youth fervently. After the end of his prayer, by coincidence, he saw the time. The following day he received a phone call from the youth who was about to sin, and who announced the following to the elder. "Last night I had decided to sin with a certain person. A little prior to the sin, I don't know why, I told her, 'I have the feeling that at this time some priest is praying for me.' When she heard my words, she became as if possessed, and angrily asked that I immediately leave her house." "What was that, Yeronda?" "What time did this happen?" asked Father Epiphanios. The youth's response gave the time during which the elder was praying for him. The only thing, however, which he told him was, "God preserved you. Be careful." "I was near," the Yeronda mentions the narrator of the incident, "when this telephone conversation took place, and he humbly announced its content, without, of course, informing me who the aforesaid youth was." Celibate clergy in family matters. "Father, we tell you our sins," a spiritual child told him. "We ask you to guide us in matters of faith, dogma, ecclesiastical life, and the like. This I understand, but for us to disturb you in matters of our daily family life, this seems to me a little odd. We do it, although I don't know if this is proper." "My child, read the epistles of the Apostle Paul. There you will see with what topics this great apostle deals. He directs the believers in matters related with the Trinitarian dogma, with divine providence, with the sacraments of the Church, with the creation of the world, with the last days, and so forth. He fights heresies and false teachers. He guides whole churches. Together, however, with his concern for all the churches, 2 Corinthians 11:28, does he not also deal with topics of behavior between spouses or between parents and their children? Does he not furthermore even regulate marital relations between them? And if he writes these things in epistles which are addressed to whole churches and by necessity contain the general framework of his commands, how much more detailed and individualized would he not deal with these topics, when night and day he did not cease, with tears counseling each one, as he himself says, Acts 20, verse 31. Once a young person was conversing with a spiritual child of the elder and was criticizing the celibate clergy who intervene in family matters and of their spiritual children, since, quote, as celibates, they do not have the experience necessary. Quite some time passed, and this youth got engaged, and although everything was going well, on the eve of the marriage, the engagement was in danger of breaking off. What had happened? The fiancée, wanting to be absolutely honorable, and with her future spouse, revealed to him that when she was small, she had undergone the unethical attack of a perverted character. This matter had poisoned the feelings of her fiancé, a thing which had very deeply wounded the girl. When the youth spoke of this distress to a friend who was also a spiritual child of the elder, he suggested that he go seek advice from Father Epiphaninos. However, due to his mistaken viewpoints regarding celibate clergy, he would not make himself seek refuge in him. Finally, being pushed, he went and he found him. The elder judged that they ought to proceed to marriage and gave his counsels. However, he saw that with such a poison in the relations of the couple, nothing good was forthcoming in their later life. So, with the greatest secrecy, He contacted the now deceased Dr. Calamari K., a pious, dedicated gynecologist, and explained the problem. She asked to see the girl. She examined her. After finding that there was no harm, she called the Yerunda. He in turn settled down the couple, and thus the matter was put in order with the aid of the celibate clergyman unto the wising up of the fiancé. Sex also. God is a so-called egotist. He asks us for everything. He who loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Matthew 10:37. So will he not also ask us to dedicate our marital relations to him also? Attention and prayer. Do much prayer for the matter of the flesh. The sin enters by the barrel and leaves by the pinhole. Much guarding is needed from everywhere and always. I would be falling also, even at my age, if in confession I did not keep strictness and distance. God's grace keeps us. If we get too bold, oh, woe unto us. The finding of a suitable person for marriage is a matter for the knees, for prayer, rights, and obligations. When someone is free, he has rights and obligations. When he gets married, he has few rights and very many obligations. When, however, he obtains children also, he has no rights, but only obligations. I am not an idiot. A young scholar, a spiritual child of the elder, had become acquainted with a young woman who was at odds with her husband. The young man, out of superficiality and carelessness, had fallen into her nets. The woman lived together with her mother, who by every means was pushing this relationship. The mother was informed of the existence of the elder and his role in the youth's life. The youth also had informed the elder of the matter. So the mother went one afternoon to the three hierarchs and found the elder. There, with an appearance and a falsified mood, with which she showed affliction and great piety, she began speaking to him of her trials, that she had a good girl, a little lower than the angels, unfortunate though, because she had married a man whom, although she had adorned appropriately as the circumstance warranted, had abandoned her. The elder at first did not know with whom he was speaking and listened to her seriously. However, as the story progressed, he began perceiving who she was. The suspicion became certainty when the mother, in the heightening of hypocritical piety, which expressed itself in her melodramatic crosses and prostrations, told him, "Saint, whose name the youth bore, had pity on me. Great is his grace. Yesterday he came to my sleep and told me, 'Go to the institution of the three hierarchs. There are preserves whom they call Epiphaninos. You are he. Is this not so?' 'Yes,' answered the elder very seriously. 'He,' the mother continued in the quote, saint's words, 'is a holy man. You are Father Epiphaninos, right?' 'Yes,' said the elder. The mother made a deep prostration. 'He will help you so that your daughter can find a good lad to marry, to escape from that wild man.' Thus the saint told me. Another deep prostration. The Yerunda was forced to take off his epitrachelion. 'Won't you tell me,' he asked her, 'do you see anything written on my forehead?' 'No,' she said, shocked. 'Do you see the word idiot written?' 'No,' she said, more shocked, almost shaking. 'Well, I am not. Listen, my lady, go tell your daughter to return to her husband and not to seek another.' 'But he will beat her. He will kill her with beating.' 'That's all right. Go now.' Superfluous to note that the lady departed, all red from shame. Marriage and celibacy in Christ. Someone asked Father Epiphaninos, yet under lately many people now put down celibacy in Christ in comparison with married life in Christ. Is this correct? He answered as follows, "My child, I never met any person up till now, nor did I hear from anywhere that someone out of his great love for God is seeking to find a woman. He runs to the mountains, to the caves, to the wilderness, out of love for Christ. I don't say that the married Christian, as a child of God, when he loves God and keeps his commandments, will not have a very great reward for this. But strong love for God, no matter how we do it, does not settle for these things alone. It leads to complete dedication. Choosing marriage or monasticism. A certain one of his spiritual children, who was undecided as to what path he should follow, marriage or monasticism, asked him to tell him what to do. "My child," he answered, "I cannot tell you what to follow. Pray a lot to God, and he will answer you." But Yarundo retorted the truth. "I am not holy for God to answer me." "God answers his children through events," the elder clarified. "Go, and you will see God's hand. In any case, whatever decision you make, I will love you equally and will bless you with both my hands. And if you get married, I will also bring you a gift." The matter of marriage or monasticism, the elder never made a matter of obedience. He left it to the free choice of each one. And this because he believed that having freely chosen, his spiritual child would criticize himself alone for his falls or failure, in the family or in the monastery, and would be urged to repentance and to further struggle, whereas if he had acted under obedience, he would criticize his spiritual father and would be led to revolt, rebellion, and despair, resulting in incalculable spiritual harm, when of course he discerned in certain youths that they were predisposed for celibacy. Either they did not have previous fleshly falls, in other words, or they were not particularly drawn to family life and atmosphere, and so forth. He urged them to take this leap, to make the heroic decision to dedicate themselves completely to Christ. The man is the head. Once an engaged couple, spiritual children of his, visited the elder in order for him to solve a difference they had. Who's to obey the other after marriage? The youth insisted that the woman had to obey the husband in everything. The young woman, however, would not agree with this viewpoint. The elder, after listening to them carefully, addressed the young woman and told her, "Listen, my child, it is natural for a couple to have different viewpoints on certain matters. This is both consequent and logical. And even ourselves, if we cut it in the middle, one piece does not fit the other. Much more so does this occur between two people. So when in a couple there is a different viewpoint on a certain subject, each one insists that his own will be done, then, as you understand, a breakup will occur. Consequently, one of the two must yield. Now listen, because it is to your advantage to yield. If your husband's viewpoint is correct, then the result will be good for the whole family. If again your husband's viewpoint is not correct, then of course the result will not be good. And then he will be forced to say, why did I insist on my way? And why didn't I allow what my wife said to be done? And if this repeats 2 or 3 times, then without you insisting and creating trouble, his own will not always be done. Consequently, it is to your advantage in both cases that you yield. Thus the elder gave on the one hand the lead step of responsibility and initiative to the man, simultaneously though guarding him from the egotistical viewpoint. I am the man. Whatever I say will be done here. The ram leads the flock. Thus we see that the law of nature and the written law of God agrees, which gives the lead role to the man. Adam was created, then Eve, 1 Timothy 2:13, and the husband is the head of the woman. Man was not made for the woman, but the woman for the man, 1 Corinthians 11:3-9. To spouses, he urged, you cannot place to a public vote or ask the members of the family or the relatives or friends about something which your husband says, even if this does not seem correct to you. You will voice your opinion, but you will allow him to undertake his responsibilities. Wishing to show that yielding between spouses as well as parents before their children many times has positive results, he would advise, why on cars have they put wheels of rubber with air inner tubes? So that they yield. They sink in a bit at each small stone or ditch of the road, and thus they pass over obstacles. If the wheels were solid and unyielding, the car would not advance. It would dissolve at a small distance due to the vibrations from the small anomalies of the ground. The same thing also happens in the case of yielding within the family. With this, many problems are gotten around, and constant spiritual progress is secured if everyone remained celibate. To the question which many secular people pose, what would happen in life if all people accepted the relative suggestion of the Apostle Paul and remained celibate in Christ? Referring to 1 Corinthians 7:7, the elder responded, "The question is theoretical and senseless. First, because it is impossible for all people to remain celibates, since not all can bear this word, Matthew 19:11. And second, if we supposed, completely arbitrarily, that everyone reached such spiritual heights so that they could remain celibate in Christ, what would the evil be? The second coming would immediately occur. The continuation of life upon the earth would cease, and everyone would immediately go to paradise." Crafts of the devil. He used to say, "How sneaky is the devil." To my children who make a successful Christian wedding, he whispers, "How much better would you be if you were in a holy monastery and lived the heavenly spiritual delights, far away from family concerns which distract you and pull you down." Then again, to my spiritual children who went to a monastery because they longed for virginity in Christ, he whispers, "How much better would you be if you'd gotten married and made a home church and lived the family happiness, far away from all this ascetic hardship and loneliness which depresses you?" If the married person became a monk, and a monk married, he would be telling them the opposite. And all this to throw them into despair and to take them off of the road of salvation. Because both the blessed marriage and virginity in Christ are a road to salvation. The icon stand and marital relations. Once, a married person asked him if it is permitted for spouses to have an icon stand in their bedroom. And he responded, "My child, you must know that Christ is everywhere, both in the kitchen and the living room and in the bedroom. Don't ever forget this." Teachings about marriage. What are the sacraments? They are sacred acts through which a certain piece of the material world is imbued with divine grace. Without it losing its material composition, texture, or qualities, it becomes a sanctifying means for man, a bearer of the energies of the Holy Spirit. As an example par excellence, we refer to the divine Eucharist, where one piece of simple bread and a little wine is altered to the real body and blood of Christ, without their natural qualities being lost. That is, those who commune see bread and wine, taste bread and wine. In reality, however, it is the deified flesh of our Lord. Analogous to the spiritual state of those who commune, it becomes nourishment for the soul, the medicine of immortality, a source of spiritual life, or a burning fire. Similar things occur with all the sacraments. What is the Christian wedding more especially? From a material, that is, instinctive viewpoint, it does not differ at all from the wedding of the atheists or of the non-Christians. For whatever reasons, all people approach marriage, and for the same reasons, Christians also come into the communion of matrimony. These reasons refer to three drives which exist in man. To the demand for the flesh's satisfaction, to the need for companionship, and to the desire to obtain descendants. Now the Church comes and blesses with the sacrament of marriage the union of her children. Of course, it does not change anything from its natural, instinctual driving foundation. It sanctifies it, however. It places it, that is, in the framework of life in Christ of the spouses, which is nothing other than a journey toward salvation and sanctification. Naturally, a sanctified marriage must have as a result purity from every pollution, which, despite the commandment of God and as a result of the natural order, can enter into the relations of spouses. The spouses, in any case, for no reason, not even on account of their marriage, are excused from the duty of constant progress in purity of soul and body and in sanctification. That such a struggling married couple entails the most ideal ground for the Church to cultivate in Christ her new members, the children, is obvious. However, the main aim of the Church, which blesses the marriage, does not cease, which is the sanctification of the spouses. Marriage and life in Christ. This life entails the arena, where we must struggle to gain the eternal. The question is, how must we struggle? Are the boundaries of the deeds which entail sin strictly defined, or are these boundaries possibly more elastic? Lately, the confusion of people has reached such a degree that it is attributed that the fathers supposedly disagree among themselves as regard where life in Christ stops and where sin begins. However, whoever studies the Holy Fathers in depth and without bias will ascertain that they do not at all disagree on this point. But let us define the Church's position in general. I believe that we agree that perfection is for us to become holy like God. This is not just empty rhetoric. It states with simple and very clear words that we must limit as much as possible our care for corrupt and earthly things in order to dedicate our life more to God. I shall explain. Food is blessed, and the Church prays for its sufficiency for her children. It is not a sin for us to eat the food which is necessary for our preservation. If, however, man limits even this biological need as well, and his concern for this becomes very little, in order to gain from this limitation more time and a better manner or disposition for communicating with God, then he will certainly receive a reward for the aforesaid struggle. Why did St. Anthony, and in general all the ascetics, limit their food to the utter least? Very simply because thus, by limiting even their biological needs, they remained more undistracted from their sole concern, their union with God. This is the perfect. From henceforth, however, what happens in the case of the rest of the people, who not only have the concern of food, but also of so many other needs? Will all of these go to hell? Of course not. Our Church accepts us with our weaknesses and our sins, so long as we repent, change direction for these, and live in humility before the long-suffering God who accepts us, despite the fact that we, out of human weakness, tend toward the corrupt and earthly things. Humility and repentance save us. From this point, however, even if we consider that our life with the lawful, according to God, enjoyments is perfect, there is still an unbridgeable chasm. The perfect is something else, toward which we must reach, and what we people do is something else. To understand what is the correct thing according to God, and to struggle for this, and to seek forgiveness because you have not achieved it, this precisely is also the content of the conscientious Orthodox Christian life. So for us many people who out of great weakness cannot reach the measure of perfection, the Church strives, and grabbing us by the hand, step by step, just as the little children learn to walk, she tries to lead us toward the perfect, which is our theosis. That is the purpose which fasting has also. It is not a ticket to paradise, but it helps us obtain the ticket. Now let's come to the topic of marriage and marital relations. Setting out from Adam and Eve. Before the fall, their life in paradise was a constant delight. They did not need to come together to feel a certain special pleasure. Their whole life was a vast happiness. Their relations, if they had remained in paradise, would have been dispassionate. However, after the fall, Adam knew Eve, his wife. He came to know that is something new in their relations. Thus, from the fall and afterward, the enjoyment of a certain special pleasure is instituted in the relations between man and woman. Now, why? Perhaps so that man could love his wife more, and likewise. Then those who are erotic maniacs would have to be the ideal spouses. However, the exact opposite occurs. Perhaps so that they could better know the love of God for man and man for God. Then the ascetics and monks ought not to have any idea about God's love. Furthermore, the married saints of our Church, who were all distinguished for their continence, must have known very few things about God's love. However, here also the exact opposite occurs. Perhaps finally did this delight enter in so that the love between spouses may be maintained? No, because in this case all the aged ought to get a divorce. So we are led to the conclusion that God wanted to garb this relation with so much pleasure solely because he associated with childbearing. Otherwise we would be dealing with a pleasure without any ballast. We ought, however, to stress furthermore that childbearing does not sanctify this pleasure, because then childbearing would be allowed outside of marriage. On the contrary, it is the sacrament of marriage which sanctifies the pleasure for childbearing. Let us not escape us, despite this, that, as we also said previously, man's purpose is to struggle to become holy like God, so that he may thus gain the heavenly kingdom. Consequently, the purpose of marriage also leads to this, to the salvation of the spouses and of the children, and not simply for childbirth, much less to fleshly enjoyment. Childbearing is not the ticket for paradise. However, it does aid in obtaining it. The Apostle Paul, in his first letter to the Corinthians, tells us, "I wish all people to be as myself also," in 7:7, that is, celibate. Here precisely he shows us the perfect, and I think that it is not difficult at all for someone to understand why it is the perfect. Very simply because the married person has to strive both for his wife and for his children. Consequently, he is not absolutely undistracted so that he can give himself completely to God. So celibacy is the perfect, and let him who can bear it, Matthew 19:12. He, though, who is not able to bear it, let him come under the communion of marriage. These are very clear things. Now, with the married people, what happens? Have they lost the kingdom of heaven? Of course not. Furthermore, God made marriage a sacrament and blessed it in Cana. This position, of course, is very far from someone saying that since I got married, my relations with my wife are lawful according to God. No one can prevent me from them. All right, they're lawful, but they should not also replace love for Christ. If this occurs, then it resembles he who, according to the parable, answered the invitation of the housemaster, "I have married a wife, therefore I cannot come." Luke 14:20. And so in marriage also, one must and can struggle for his salvation and achieve it. How, though? The Apostle Paul, in his first letter to the Corinthians, says simply and clearly, "Do not deprive one another, unless it is agreed upon for a time, so that you may be still with fasting and prayer, and again then come together, so that Satan does not tempt you for your incontinence. While this I say by allowance, not by command, for I wish all people to be as myself. But each one has his own gift from God, one thus, while another thus." Thus, the perfect in marriage as well is for one to live as if celibate. Nevertheless, continence should be practiced after a common agreement, otherwise it is a sin. Very clearly explained things. The one spouse cannot deprive the other from his body because, very simply, the Apostle Paul himself says the body of each spouse is governed by the other. Quote, "The wife does not govern her own body but the husband, while likewise the husband does not govern his own body but the wife." 1 Corinthians 7:4. Do you wish to govern your body? Remain celibate. For this reason, celibacy is the perfect. Do you wish, you spouses, to abstain, to dedicate yourself to God? Do it. This is the perfect thing in marriage. To not deprive one another is not the perfect. For this reason also the apostle advises by allowance, not by command. Now, why is that the perfect? Because for the love of God alone you are deprived from a lawful and blessed relation. You do, that is, what the ascetic does, who deprives himself of blessed food in order to approach God more. Now, someone else might say, this is all right, but it is impossible to be achieved. Answering theologically, we say that what is impossible for man is possible for God. Luke 18:27. Let each one try, and whatever they achieve, the struggle is what will count. The struggle to be detached from earthly things and to be united to God. The objection, though, also has a rationalistic refutation. If you should need to go abroad for business or academic reasons for quite a long period of time, most of the times you are forced to be deprived of your wife. What will you do then, you, the Orthodox? Will you take refuge in sin? If she becomes ill and remains for a time in the hospital, what will you do? Will they put a curtain in the hospital so that you may come together with her? Or will you cheat on her? By necessity, you will keep continence. So for business, academic, or health reasons, you understandably are deprived of your wife. For Christ, can you not be deprived of her a bit? Either we are orthodox and love Christ or not. Someone would probably say, well, thus our life will be a constant anxiety. On the one hand, to know that you must also be continent for certain periods, and on the other hand, not to achieve it. On the contrary, that for the Orthodox Christian is not anxiety or agony, but a struggle. The one is completely different from the other. Things are, of course, a little difficult. Let us not forget, though, that the Lord himself said, narrow is the gate, and grievous is the path which leads to life, Matthew 7:14. Abstinence in married people. Some people completely reject abstinence, which has as its purpose the avoidance of childbearing for a duration of time. The elder, however, did not take this position and did not exclude something like this. He would justify his position as follows. The Apostle Paul urged toward celibacy in Christ those who had the disposition and the power to bear it. He accepted it not only as a presupposition of exclusive dedication to God and to the work of his church, to which all faithful to a certain degree are dedicated, but also in cases where some people did not want or could not bear the burdens and toils of marriage. He advised it for these cases and further warned, such as these married people will have affliction in the flesh. 1 Corinthians 7:28. So, if this holds for the whole, for all aspects of marriage without exception, it can to a greater part hold for one part of it, for fleshly marital relations, the result of which in the natural order is childbearing. In simpler words, since the Apostle Paul not only allows but also advises, he of course does not impose celibacy and virginity for all who wish and are able, not only for reasons of dedication to God, but also to avoid the toils and afflictions which accompany marriage. The same can hold within marriage as well. Some people are able, and this does not cease being in agreement with the will of God, to prefer abstinence. The elder believed and taught that what is sought in our every deed must be the keeping of God's commandments, one of which undoubtedly is childbearing as well, without, however, being absolute. As, for example, thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy mind, and all thy strength, Mark 12:30. If we take this in an absolute sense, then all monks who did not come from married people, the celibate clerics, as well as the unmarried lay people, would be God fighters, fighting against the aforesaid command of God. But the matter is not so. Childbearing, according to God, is of course a necessary consequence of the fleshly marital relations which are blessed by the Church. In no way, however, can these relations which have been blessed be considered as obligatory presuppositions for salvation. The elder was a realist. He knew the passions which nestle in the hearts of even spiritually cultivated Christians. If what is sought is the keeping of God's command as the only motive for childbearing, in which the upbringing of children is implied in the education and counsel of the Lord, Ephesians 6:4, then everyone who has obtained children, whether few or many, is accusable with rare exception, because in the final analysis, their motive was in reality fleshly satisfaction, not obedience to God's will as regards childbearing. If the elder used to say fleshly pleasure was missing, who would undertake the burden, the responsibility, the dangers to give birth and to nurture the children, despite the existence of the related commandment of God? Very few. And thus the race of man would have vanished a long time ago. So something like this doesn't occur. The Lord interjected pleasure in marital relations. The fact must not escape us, however, that as a rule, children are conceived incidentally in the whirlpool of fleshly satisfaction. At least let not their conception be obstructed, he used to say. This state of almost all the faithful spouses is tolerated by the Church, and by condescension is allowed. It is very far, however, from being able to be considered as the precise keeping of the related command of God. Purity of heart and the sanctification of believers, of clerics, of lay monastics, of married people and unmarried people is par excellence what is sought for. It is the chiefly important absolute command of God, in the keeping of which he is par excellence pleased. And so the celibates have as their main work above all to struggle in the arena of this universal command, so that they may see God. Matthew 5:8. This is the primary obligation of spouses, which must also regulate the common marital life. Elder, isn't abstinence a very heavy cross for married people? Abstinence, my child, is a cross and a struggle for all, not only for married people. But if we wish to go to paradise, we have no other choice but to carry our cross. Whoever wishes to come after me, let him deny himself and carry his cross and follow me, says the Lord. What should the monks say who make this struggle their whole life without even the possibility of an outlet in periods of great temptations? And furthermore, they do not have the consolation of another human presence next to them, nor the care from a companion. They do not see a handmade work in their life, such as the birth and the upbringing of their own offspring and children, in which parents feel their true worth and place their hopes for their old age. And carrying this cross, the monks have the sense their whole life long that they are just barely being saved. So, will you married people be saved without a struggle? For you, is everything supposed to be free and easy? The elder praised abstinence of spouses based on common agreement and always associated with their spiritual uplifting in accordance with the indications of the Holy Apostle Paul, but also when he accepted it or urged it as the only permissible solution to couples who, either for reasons of health or exhaustion or other personal ones, wished to stop bearing children for a certain period. Usually they already had 3, 4, 5, or even more children. In this case, he strove to elevate them spiritually. He urged an intense sacramental life, frequent attendance at church, more fervent prayer, careful watchfulness, careful behavior. When in confession they told him of the struggle they had, he would encourage them with stories from the desert fathers about the struggles of the ascetics who fought the flesh unto blood. Furthermore, he presented to them examples of contemporary couples who lived in their marriage for long periods of time in abstinence, while he also reminded and stressed the words of the prayer of Compline to the Lord. Protect us from every dark and lustful pleasures of the night. Seize the drives of the passions, calm the revolts of our flesh, and put to sleep every earthly and material train of thought. Father, someone told him, you Christians with your sermons concerning abstinence, they go against nature. By what right do you have this? Nature knew something to place this sexual instinct in man. What are you that you try to subdue it? My child, God placed this instinct in man, but he did not place it there by itself. He directly associated it with all the responsibilities which accompany the preservation of the race. Man, though, keeps only the one side of the coin, pleasure. The other side, which is called responsibility, he throws in the trash. So you tell me now, who's going against nature? We Orthodox Christians or you? Love and eros. Yeranda, is there a difference between eros and love? Of course, eros demands exclusivity, whereas love may be addressed to many. But even this love, won't it run out sometime? Or as it is being distributed to many at each distribution, won't it become less? No, my child, neither the one occurs nor the other. Real love resembles the candle flame. As you light more little candles, the initial flame remains whole. It is not at all diminished. And each new little candle has as much flame as the other ones do. The will of God and pleasure. From the anatomical construction of man and woman, we conclude that in paradise also the preservation of the human race would have occurred as now also. However, it would have been dispassionate. In other words, it would have taken place without pleasure and without pain. After the fall, however, human nature ended up wishing to flee pain, and because the birth and upbringing of children entails pain and toil, man, misusing his freedom, yielding to his pain, and fleeing, would have avoided childbearing. For this reason, God placed pleasure in the marital relation as a form of bait, so that man, being drawn, that is, by the bait of pleasure, serves the will of God for the preservation of the race. Prayer for family difficulties. Once, when I had visited Father in his house and we were conversing, recalls a spiritual child of his, he received a brief phone call. His face was enlightened. He gave out a sigh of relief, and hanging up the phone, he got up right away, went to his icon stand, made 3 deep prostrations, and said, "Glory to thee, O Lord. I thank you, my God." Upon returning, he explained to me that a certain family matter, very mixed up because of egotism of the in-laws, had been put in order. I had prayed a lot about this, he said. Choosing a spouse. An unmarried girl, as she confessed to the elder, mentioned once that she had been matched with a certain young lad who wore glasses, and she rejected him for this reason. Father Epiphaninos, discerning the secondariness of the matter, stressed to her prophetically, "Be careful, my child, so that he whom you will get doesn't bring you someone else with glasses." Finally, the young girl married someone else who did not wear glasses, but their child, even from his little infancy, needed to wear glasses. Concerning children, upbringing. Speak more to God about your children, rather than to your children about God. For the correct Christian upbringing of your children, few words, much example, and more prayer are necessary. Elder, the parents of this child are in much distress because of the life he is leading. Tell them, my child, much prayer, God will help. There do not exist people for whom hands are lifted up in prayer or knees are bloodied who are not led to repentance. The soul of the adolescent, he used to say, is in an explosion of freedom. For this reason, it receives various counsels with difficulty. So instead of advising him constantly and scolding him every so often, throw the weight of your effort to the following. Present the problem to Christ, to the Panagia, and to the saints, and ask them to wise him up. Deal with children as with colts, sometimes tightening and sometimes loosening the bit. When the colt kicks, we loosen the reins without letting go, otherwise they will break. When, however, the colt is calm, then we can pull the reins and take it wherever we wish. Parents must love their children as their children, and not as their idols. That is, they should love the child as he is, and not as they would wish he is, that is, resembling them. Children are gods. One mother relates, "Once in confession I told him, I worry a lot about my children, that they might suffer something, that something evil might happen to them. I place 1,001 things in my mind." The Yerander's response came very quickly, intensely, and in a shattering tone. "And who told you that the children are yours? They are God's. They are his little sheep, and he has put you to guard them." To the question, where is God's love, since he allows even the small children to die? He would respond, God has appointed parents to bring up his children and not their children. The children are God's and not theirs. Many times with the deaths of small children, God does what the shepherd does to a wayward ewe who does not wish to enter the fold. He grabs the little lamb to force it to come close to him also. The elder and children. The children who confessed to him and maintained certain serious bonds with the church, he loved in particular and would cover them before excessive demands of their parents. They, of course, also had their weaknesses too, their problems and their faults. He handled them sometimes with strictness also, however, always with pastoral care, with understanding and evangelical discernment. To parents who complained burdensomely about the imperfections or the small improprieties of their children, he was strict. Be thankful and glorify God who gave you such children, kneeling and with tears of thankfulness, so that those things you do not imagine don't happen, and then you will see. If a parent murmured that his children were difficult and easily excitable, he would tell them, "Do you know any child today who is easy and obedient? Why do you wish your children to be an exception?" While if the parent insisted on complaining, he would find himself threatened by the wisening canon of the elder. "If you continue complaining, I will give you a canona to do 200 prostrations a day." Now, this reaches the limits of ingratitude. At this occasion, let's mention here how Aunt Alexandra handled the parents who complained about their children for the smallest reason. "Yeah, so what did you want, to give birth to angels? You made children." Children's question: "Elder, what should we do when we face reactions at our home in relation to the spiritual life and fasting, confession, divine communion, going to church, orthopraxia, and so forth?" Learn to put your foot down. I can't understand why the rascals, the Marxists, and so forth pass on their line of thought in their homes, and furthermore other matters which are many times contrary to God's law, while you, to avoid displeasing your families, do not lift up your voice for God's sake. How do you expect your character to be strengthened? A small child asked him, "Yananda, where was I before I was born?" "In God's mind, my child." One Sunday after the Divine Liturgy, the elder was at his office and was conversing. At a certain moment, a spiritual child of his came in with his 4-year-old daughter. The elder discerned right away that the young girl was angry and sought to learn the cause. Because she would not answer, the father undertook to explain that just a little while before she had slapped her uncle as he was joking around with her. Despite the counsels which they gave her, however, and her uncle's asking forgiveness, she would not ask forgiveness. Then the elder left them all in the office, took her by the hand, went into the other room. From there he called her uncle, explaining the cause of the phone call, and told the little girl, "Come, my good little child, ask forgiveness from your uncle." The little girl kept her mouth sealed. "It's just a little word. Say it, my good little child. There, I will get you a gift tomorrow also. Say this little word." The little girl resisted with stubborn silence, and the elder said to himself, "Look at how the devil fears this word, even when a small child says it. Look at how much he has tied her and doesn't allow her." The attempt continued for more than half an hour. In the end, the elder, with a scolding mood, told the little girl, "Listen, my child, if you do not ask for forgiveness, you will not have God's aid, and you will become sick. Do you hear? You will become sick." The little girl started mumbling through her teeth, "Forgive me." The elder insisted, "Louder, my little child, louder, so that the devil hears it and goes far away." The little girl said it again, a little louder. The elder then kissed her, gave her money, and led her to the office where he had left the visitors waiting. "All of you give a 100 drachma note to, because today she fought with the devil and defeated him." Telephone conversation from Halkidiki to the elder. "Father, your blessing." "The Lord's." "Father, do you give the blessing for me to go with my wife on an excursion to London with Father so-and-so?" "Where will you leave the children?" "At my mother and sister-in-law's." "Then go." Only when he was assured that the children would be in safe hands did he give his blessing for the trip. Don't pressure God. The elder related the following event as he had heard it from a bishop he knew. Years ago, the bishop had stayed 1 or 2 weeks in a certain city for healing at its natural hot springs. There, he kept company with a certain serious elderly man who remained at the same hotel and seemed pious and spiritually mature. One day, that man related his history, beginning, "If God does not give children, he knows something. We should not pressure him as we wish to give them to us." He had gotten married the first time when very young, but he did not obtain children. The spouses were very unhappy about this, and after they exhausted all means of science, they sought refuge in God, prayers, liturgies, vigils, vows, philanthropies. They wanted, of course, to at least have one child. God allowed them, as was shown afterward, to have a boy. The child grew up normally. When, though he became 12 years old, his mother died, and he became orphaned. After a few years, the father was married again to a woman quite a bit younger than he. His job demanded that he frequently travel to the countryside. After one such absence, the man returned home unexpectedly and caught his now 20-year-old son red-handed, sinning with his stepmother. His soul oiled over, and he took a knife and murdered his son. At the court, a real wreck, he did not try to justify himself, but he undertook all his responsibilities. Despite the mitigation which they recognized, he was condemned to quite a few years in prison. His wife naturally separated from him, and he fulfilled his sentence. After he got out of jail, he lived alone and in repentance, awaiting his death. He concluded saying, "Why should I have egotistically pressured God to satisfy my will, thinking that it was also his will? Why did I not allow him to judge and to give me whatever he wanted? Now I have neither a child nor a family, and furthermore am the murderer of my own child." Having many children. Having many children is more a matter of sacrifice and less of material means. The elder considered that families which have many children are very blessed by God. He furthermore mentioned the following circumstance. A certain young man who had very many children, he died relatively young. All who knew him mentioned that he was very harsh and he had tortured his wife and children. A short time, however, before he died, he came to repentance, asked for forgiveness from his family, confessed, and left prepared. And the elder commented, God, rewarding this man's obedience in the matter of having many children, saved both him and delivered his family from his coarse behavior. A family of spiritual children of the elders with 3 children reacted strongly every time the elder would pose the topic of having a 4th child. Among other justifications, irrational for spiritual people, the husband, who was a government employee, was intensely concerned about the possibility of his being transferred from the Athens area, an event which would have harmful consequences on the family. Father Epiphaninos, as always, among other therapeutic prescriptions, said, "Let's leave these things, my children, in God's providence with our prayers so that we may have positive results." God's love granted the couple the 4th child and no transfer to the husband. For many years he remained serving in the Athens area, and only when the children had grown up quite a bit was there presented a need for him to be transferred for a short period of time. At the baptism of the 5th child of a spiritual children of his, he stressed, "My children having many children is a witness and a martyrdom." A witness because the Christian who has many children daily proceeds in a confession of faith, that he is keeping the command of God concerning childbearing, while a martyrdom not only because he constantly undergoes the mocking and the ironic comments of this world, but also because he consumes himself ceaselessly in family cares. At someone's question as to whether it was purposeful for him to financially help a man who had many children without having clear knowledge of his real condition, or whether he would prudently use the aid which he would offer him, the elder said, "My child, he has many children, and of course he has needs. Give to him without examining very much. Who today makes so many children?" Married people should not only avoid contraception, but also planning the children. They should leave themselves with trustfulness in the hands of God and consider the coming of each child a great, godly gift. Children are not sweetbreads, so that we order them up in the bakery whenever and as we want them. And it should not escape us even for a moment that man, upon having children, becomes a co-creator with God. Concerning abortions. After the Turks entered Cyprus and the rapes which occurred, the Cypriot church allowed abortions for these circumstances. So someone asked the elder if this was correct or not. And he answered, "No, it is not correct. If the raped woman was worldly, then no question is posed. She will not ask the church what to do anyway. If, however, the girl is faithful, then she will keep the fruit of her rape. And when she appears before God, she will tell him, 'Because of the words of your lips I kept harsh ways.'" Psalm 16:4. "That child was my disgrace, my martyrdom, my cross. I kept it and did not transgress your will." Think with what boldness such a woman will stand before the throne of God. The questioner then said to the elder, "What is higher, though, life or honor?" "I think honor. So precisely so that such a girl can avoid public mockery from the birth of an illegitimate child. It would be good for her to proceed to abortion. There is, however, a big difference, which you are not taking into consideration. You do not have the right to keep your honor, taking away his life. That is the life of someone else, as is the conceived embryo. Life and honor can consequently be compared, but only when they coincide in the same person." Once a university student went to confess that she had had an abortion in the period during which she was engaged. When she entered the confessional and told Father Epiphaninos her sin rather coldly and without feeling its weight, he, to bring her to feeling, told her strictly, without beating around the bush, "You are a murderer, a murderess. You killed your own innards." She was stunned and started sobbing. When the elder saw her repentance and that she truly, consciously realized her crime, he read the prayer of forgiveness over her and told her with loving care, "Get up, my daughter, and go with the blessing of Christ and with confidence that God forgave you and delivered your soul from the weight of sin." Once, Father himself related, a mother and her daughter came to the confessional. They started mentioning the reasons why the daughter had had an abortion. I listened while anger began to dominate me. I tried to convince them that they could not have done a more dreadful thing than that which they had already done, that they chose the worst solution which could have been even chosen, and that they had committed a murder. They were unconvinced. At a certain moment, the mother started telling me that they had acted correctly because their social position, their relations with people of a certain social status, would not allow her daughter to give birth to an illegitimate child. When I saw that, instead of becoming humble, they were getting rasher, I shot up. I took off the epitrachelion, the stole, and told them, "Leave quickly, because if you continue, I will place such a penance upon you that you will jump to the ceiling, such a penance that no one will be able to loosen it." Then they got up and, very startled, ran away. Many years ago, a lady with her only daughter visited the confessional. When she was engaged with a certain youth, she had become pregnant. The only reason for the visit was for them to convince the elder to yield to their disposition to proceed to stop the pregnancy, because insurmountable difficulties prevented the quick performance of the marriage. Because the mother of the groom, who was a very pious woman, reacted very strongly to this, they thought that through the elder they could bypass the obstacle of the future mother-in-law. "My lady," stressed the elder, "do you know what you are planning is murder, and furthermore is premeditated." "But, Father, what can we do, since the marriage cannot take place now?" "And you came to me to give you a blessing to commit a murder?" "Father, well, what can be done now? You realize that if the child is born without the marriage having proceeded, the honor of our family will be defamed." "My lady, you knocked at the wrong door." Then something unexpected happened. With demonic rudeness, the lady addressed the elder and told him, "Since, Father, you don't understand us, we will proceed to end the pregnancy, and then we will come for you to forgive us." The elder shot up from his seat, and having the sense, as he characteristically said, that he was fighting body against body with Lucifer, he scolded with a senatorian voice, "You will go to hell. Do you hear? You will go to hell because you are challenging God's philanthropy. I will tell you just one thing. If you dare come, know that I will scorch you. I will scorch you." The lady hastened to disappear together with her daughter. After narrating this circumstance, when we asked the Yarandar what he meant by saying that he would sizzle her, he answered, "I realized she was very wealthy. As a presupposition for me to accept her, in the confessional I would demand that she would sell all her estate down to the last drachma, to give it as charity to the poor. Then we would see." One faithful couple once went to the Yarandar asking his advice. They did not have him as a spiritual father, per se. The problem was that the wife was taking strong medicines for a certain illness of hers, and during the period of the therapy, she'd become pregnant. The doctor urged her to have an abortion because the child would undoubtedly be born an invalid. The elder told them, "Why did you come to me? To give you permission to kill it. Do you have other children?" "Yes," they answered. "We have a little boy." "Is he healthy?" asked the elder. "Yes," they answered. "If, God forbid, your child suffers a stroke or some car hits him and he ends up a vegetable, will you throw him away or will you kill him?" "Of course not." "Then why do you want to kill the conceived child? Because you have not yet seen it? Or because you don't love it? That doesn't matter. That also is your child. Listen, science is not infallible. The doctors many, many times make mistakes. And above the doctors is the Creator, God. In Him have trust. I believe that it will not be born an invalid, as the doctors say. But even if something like this happens, doxa to Theo, glorify God and consider that this is your cross, which you must bear unmurmuringly, and He will give you credit to your account in heaven. And when you go there, you will tell Him, Lord, because of the words of your lips, we kept harsh ways. Psalm 16:4. Do not wish to avoid this cross, because some other one, even heavier, will await you. Have courage. Pray to our Lord. I will also pray, and I believe that your little child will be born healthy. Go with the Lord's blessing. Truly, after a few months, a charming, very healthy little girl was born. With tears, the parents announced it to the elders, saying, "We thank you for your support and your prayers. The Lord God lives,